first real cold night, and not a fan. So I know I'm a bit of a baby, but anytime I have to start putting my gloves on to drive, I just know it's it's getting to be that time of year. I'm gonna go play 2.5, but the 5.10's been running occasionally. I think pretty much just on Wednesdays, and I've been considering getting on the list. It's a little daunting because I haven't really played much 5.10 in my life. I just haven't. So right now, just on the 2.5 list. But if the 5.10 runs, maybe. Been valeting lately, but we're gonna change it up here on the garage. Let's get going. All right, welcome back to the vlog. Again, one video pretty recently basically just destroyed it, killed it. And a big part of it was from you guys really commenting a bunch, liking that video. So if you wouldn't mind, leave a like on this video if you enjoy this content. But this video is just a throwback to a 2.5 session I played a little while ago at this point, but we are catching up. I know I've said that a billion times, but we're much closer to caught up than we've been in quite some time. So I'm on vacation trying to pump some of these out. Let's get into some of these hands. So 2.5 no limit at Maryland Live. I ended up getting into this game pretty quickly for 1,200. Just losing a bunch of small to mid-sized pots without much interesting action. So sitting on $700 right now, and we're actually 5-handed at the must-move game, but one player is absent. So the cutoff limps in. I'm in the small blind with pocket nines, and I bump it up to 25, and the cutoff calls. So we go heads up to a flop of 10, 8, 6. I could c-bet here, but I decide to check, and when he bets 40, I decide to make the call. I think if we're gonna check this hand, we absolutely have to call. So the turn is the deuce of diamonds, second diamond on board. I check, he now bets 80. I mean, I still think we are doing okay here. I mean, he can bet some 8x, but it's definitely not a fun spot. I think that we mostly only beat bluffs at this point, and we lose a lot of value. So I wouldn't hate folding, except that we have the gutter as well. So I make the call, and the river brings in our gut shot, but it is also the third diamond on board. 7 of diamonds, backdoor flush comes in. So I check, and he now tank jams 280. So with the size of the pot, it seems like it's gonna be pretty impossible to fold here. You would think that we'll chop this hand some of the time. You would think that maybe he can overvalue a set or something weird sometimes. Maybe he can even have a bluff sometimes. I don't know, it's really hard to put him on a hand. There are certainly some backdoor flushes that come in, so I was not really happy about the situation, but I also couldn't see myself getting to this river and folding a hand this strong when he's just gone bet, bet, bet. It's not like there was any action that really suggested that he always has a flush or that he, always has us beat. So I know that people kind of got a little hung up on me folding the second nuts to the nuts a couple of videos ago. If you haven't checked that one out, check it out, because that is a pretty different type of hand in my opinion. This one, the bet's too small, the pot's too big. We just don't have enough information to say that we are not winning. So I make the call, and he announces 2 pair. So I just show, I don't force him to say which 2 pair it was. I think that when he's in position especially, this is a huge mistake, overplay. He can't really expect me to call off with worse ever. I mean, I tanked with a better hand. So very lucky for us, I think, to be good here against that kind of a hand, not even just like a bluff, but a worse value hand. Maybe he's bluffing. I don't really know. But anyway, we get to recoup some of our losses here, and at the next hand, we've got 1K in the stack. However, we are now three-handed, again, still at the must-move game, so kind of at the mercy of the list and the other tables. So when the button opens at 20 and I'm in the small blind with King-Jack offsuit, this is just not a spot where I can be folding a lot. So this hand goes way up in value three-handed. I end up three-betting it to 75, and the button ends up calling. Flop comes out King 8-4. I choose to c-bet 60, and he makes the call. Turn is the jack of spades, so we actually improve, and we're pretty deep, so I wanted to kind of maximize value. I ended up making it 170, but it may have been just too big in a three-bet pot where I look pretty strong because he just folds. At the same time, he could have just folded something like nines, where he's never folding flop but always folding turn. So at this point, obviously we've chipped up a fair bit, pretty much back to even, and finally get called to the main game. I'm pretty sure they ended up playing heads up for a few hands at the table that I left. I know that someone else came to the table too, but just brutal to end up, you know, playing three-handed and heads up for a while at 2-5, but at least the rake's less, I guess. I don't know. Anyway, for me, I was onto the main game, and the first hand I ended up playing, I was in middle position with pocket jacks, and I bumped it up to 20. The hijack, the cutoff, and the big blind all call though, so we go four ways to a flop of 5-4 deuce. Checks to me, and even though this is a flop that isn't really that favorable for the pre-flop aggressor, definitely going to want to be c-betting here with my stronger hands. So that's what I do. I make it 45, and the hijack calls. The cutoff raises to 125, which is definitely not a fun spot to be in. It is a board with a lot of draws available though, so I don't think we can fold just yet. But at the same time, he's going to have all the sets, some of the two pairs, probably some straights in his range, and some of his weakest hands will often be combo draws. So not happy about it, but I decided to make the call, and the hijack actually also calls. So three ways to quickly ballooning pot here, and it is the ace of clubs on the turn. So I check, and the hijack now jams 700. The hijack's not the one who raised the flop, so this is a very interesting line. The cutoff now also folds, so we actually get the option here to potentially call, whereas I think if cutoff calls, it's like an insta-fold. But when we think about like what the hijack would just call flop with, and then just call again, like just overcall the 125, and then now jam 700 into a much less than $700 pot, it's really hard to put him on any bluffs, really. It seems like the best, or rather the worst hands that he could do this with would be like ace-x of spades, and even that seems like a pretty big stretch to me. I think it's much more likely he would just check and hope to see a cheaper river. It seems like a lot of his hands are just going to be like 3x of spades. Maybe he has a hand like a set that he slow played and then got, you know, a little bit scared of the board with. He doesn't want to see an even worse card if it checks through. I don't know. But basically none of those hands are we doing even remotely okay against. So I think I ended up with a pretty easy fold. Let it go. He ends up showing 7-3 of spades. So somehow manages to play it like uber slow, like this gigantic combo draw, super duper slow. And then gets there with the sort of relatively disguised part of what he could hit, and it just blasts away for more than pot. So I'm not saying you would have gotten a lot more action, but it seems like the cutoff at least had something. So kind of interesting hand. Maybe we could have just folded flop. I think that's sort of close, but leave me a comment down below letting me know what you thought about that hand. So at this next hand, we've got 1.2K. Middle position, open raises to 80 for some reason. I've never seen him do this before. It's not a player I know super well or anything, but it's just sort of an ungodly number of big blinds to open to in this game. I would say the standard is a $20 to $25 open. I'm probably on the bigger end with 25 to 30 a lot of the time. Although in the last hand I opened was 20. Yeah, I mean, it's not really gonna matter that much. Most of the time I can just fold here, but we end up looking down on the button with pocket kings, So it's an interesting decision because we're 900 deep. He's made it 80. If we call, the pot's 160, if everybody else folds, which you kind of assume they will, it's very debatable what we should do here. I think flatting has a lot of merit. In game, I was a little bit worried about flatting and not getting that much action against the worst hands on a lot of boards, like for example, pocket jacks, pocket tens. That's like a very common hand that people would raise really big because they're afraid of playing it post flop. And those hands often struggle to put a lot of the money in post flop. So I kind of, in the moment, really wanted to just shovel as much money in as possible. Now I figured he was probably pretty strong. So I ended up bumping it up to 300. But that being said, I think it's a mistake. I think that I should be going significantly smaller, like maybe only 2.5x, maybe 3x, but not almost 4x. Like doing this, I sort of wanted to give him the opportunity to shove pre-flop, but I think he has that opportunity even if we go to 200 or 250. So a bit of a mistake there, I think. He does end up tanking, but folding. So we just get to pick up a sort of free 80 bucks there. Kind of weird. It almost makes me wonder if the guy misclicked, but I didn't really think that he did based on how he threw the chips in or anything like that. But kind of definitely gotta wonder. In this next hand, we've got 1.3k in the stack. I'm in the straddle for 10. Early position limps in, middle position makes it 30, and the button calls. Small blind calls as well, and I'm sitting there with ace-8 of clubs in the straddle. Definitely an option here. We could absolutely 3-bet and squeeze, but I think that my image will sometimes be that I'm gonna squeeze the spot more, so I decided to just call. This hand will play pretty well multi-way. The flop comes out Jack-9 deuce with 2 hearts, and it checks all the way around. The turn is the 9 of hearts, and I think that I should probably just not stab at this pot at all, but when everybody checks this flop and the small blind checks to me as well, it's pretty unlikely that anybody has something particularly strong. So I decided to stab here with the intention of potentially stabbing turn and river. So I bet 90, folds to the small blind who tanks and calls. The river is a complete brick, and she's only got about 310 in her stack, so I think this is a perfectly good time to bluff, basically stick with the plan. She does check, and I go ahead and make the shove. She tanks. She tanks for a pretty long while, which seems pretty consistent with what I was thinking, that she would have a pretty medium strength hand here most of the time, or possibly something with just like the ace of hearts in it. She tanks for about 30, 45 seconds and calls with pocket 9s. Yeah, with the literal nuts. Ooh, so that one wasn't too fun. She definitely got some odd looks from that hand. I don't know if she was trying to verify that she had quads or what. But yeah, a bit of a... I don't even know if that qualifies as a misread because she was the small blind, so when she checks flop with the set, it makes perfect sense, just ends up checking through. She improves to quads on the turn, so like she has the least vulnerable hand possible, but the fact that she can't call the river definitely calls into question whether she knew she had quads or not at first. So yeah, kind of unfortunate one there. I don't necessarily hate the river shove, but I definitely think the turn bet is very questionable because someone can just have a single 9. It's not really that hard for that to be true. So moving on to the next hand, we've got 1k in the stack now, and the undergun player who has been opening like close to 40% of hands seems to not really be positionally aware, so it's like 40% of hands from everywhere. He raises to 30 bucks. Under the gun 2, who is I would say a semi-pro, definitely a regular, makes the call. And middle position, who is definitely a pro and someone who I've played a fair bit with, makes it 110. He's definitely aware of Under the Gun's tendency, so he doesn't have to be mega tight here. He can absolutely be sort of isolating with a somewhat wider 3-bit range. He doesn't need to be super tight. I'm next stacking in the hijack, and I look down at pocket queens. So this is a spot that's a little bit tricky because in normal configuration like this, if Under the Gun was a sort of straightforward player, you would expect that middle position would be sort of tight in this spot because Under the Gun opens, next guy calls, basically next guy 3-bets, nobody should really be that wide. So I wouldn't always think that a 4-bet is necessary here, but I also kind of hate flatting 3-bets with like 5 players behind still to act. So I decide to make a cold 4-bet to 280, and it folds back around to middle position, who was the 3-better. We're basically 1K effective, and he 5-bets to 560. So almost a min 5-bet, and basically if I call, the money goes in on any jack high board or lower. If I jam, he shouldn't really have a folding range here. I don't think he's ever bluffing. So in this spot, it's really a question of like, does he 5-bet jacks ever? Does he 5-bet any combos of ace king, basically? And I kind of thought the answer was no. It's really hard to say, but it's just so rare at these stakes to see anybody 5-bet anything except for aces and kings. Even ace king suited is a pretty rare occurrence, I would say. So I very begrudgingly fold, and he lets me pick a card to show. So I turn it over, and it's the king of clubs. Not really anything surprising. Honestly, if it was anything other than an ace or a king, that's where you start to get pretty concerned. But it doesn't really surprise me to see a king there. So he later says he had kings. I definitely believe him there. It's not rare for me to fold queens pre-flop, so it was nice to have at least a little validation there. I feel like a lot of times I make big folds, I just get brutally punished. But this time I felt somewhat rewarded. In this next hand, we've got 1K in the stack, early position limps in, and I'm in the hijack with pocket kings. Bump it up to 35, and cutoff calls. Both blinds also call, and somehow the limper just folds. So we go to this flop of 8-6-6, and it checks to me. This is a flop that, because it's rainbow, is actually not that threatening to us, but also it's a little bit hard to get a lot of action from worse across multiple streets. I think multi-way, this is actually a kind of cool hand to mix in as a check, and I plan to check call multiple streets or get 2 streets of value later on if it checks through. So I do decide to check this time, and cutoff bets 75. Folds to me, and I stick with the plan and make the call. Turn is the deuce of diamonds, and I check once again. He now bets 160, and I mean, this is pretty much in line with what I think is possible. I think he can absolutely be value betting 9s, maybe 10s, some 8x holdings, but I'm definitely at the point now where like the board's getting pretty coordinated. If I check call here and the board gets really rough and he continues betting, I could potentially just get away, but can't do that just yet. So I make the call, and the river is the 7 of diamonds. So it completes a couple straight draws in 9-10 and 5-4. It completes a backdoor flush draw, which is a hand that I think honestly either of us could hold here, although I do have the king of diamonds in my hand. I check, and he now bets 370, which is not technically that big of a bet relative to the pot, but it's a pretty big bet for these stakes in the sense that you just don't see a lot of like 70 plus big blind bets going in at any point at 2-5. So I think that it's definitely not a snap fold, but it's also definitely not a snap call either. With the price I was getting and the fact that he can hold 9s and 10s, I think some percentage of the time, and I wanted to discount boats, especially pocket 7s, and deuces he probably shouldn't have either. We're really looking at a couple combos of pocket 8s at the most, some 6x hands, like 7-6, ace-6 suited, and then beyond that, it's really hard to put them on a hand. So like some backdoor flushes that come in, yes, but I don't think that many of them, since a lot of his ace-high ones will probably just check the flop. And it's more like the combo draw type stuff, like the gutter on the flop that gets a backdoor flush draw too, where he would barrel it on the turn and then get there on the river. So with all that in mind, I went back and forth many times on this, but I decided to make the call, and he shows pocket queens. So it kind of just goes to show you that like no matter how much thought you put into something, every once in a while someone's just gonna have a hand where you just completely did not expect it. I really didn't think that this player, who was basically the first one to call pre-flop would have just called pre-flop instead of 3-betting, especially from late position. It's very rare. On top of that, the fact that he felt comfortable enough to bet so big on the river, I was really surprised at that too, because I mean, I guess I shouldn't be that surprised because he's sort of like slow playing queens pre-flop. You kind of get in this mentality of I need to make up the value later. But with all of those like, nines through queens type hands, I feel like he should be worried once I check call flop. Not worried like I'm never good here, but worried that I have at least some slow plays here and that I have some hands that maybe aren't slow plays, but that are just better over pairs than him where I play it like this. Now, I definitely played it to be deceptive, so it's not like I think he should just immediately put me on kings or anything, but I was definitely surprised to see him show up with the hand from the pre-flop action and how aggressively he bet it. So it felt pretty fortunate to bounce back, make a little bit of a comeback there, and wrap up the session on a little bit of a high note. Remember, if you like this video, leave it a thumbs up. It really helps out with the algorithm and helping this video perform better and get to more eyes. Leave me a comment down below letting me know what you thought about that hand, any hand. Love to hear from you guys about all that. We also have Discord. There's a link down in the description below. So if you want to join a community of poker players who like thinking and talking about the game, definitely join us over there. It's already starting to get pretty active, so it's been pretty fun. Aside from that, I've got a lot more videos coming out. I know I mentioned the Poker Time from Portland 510. I don't yet have the produced version of that, so I'm debating whether I want to put out a video without the produced version, but for now, I will just be putting out these videos, should have the produced one soon, and should be able to work on that video shortly. Thank you guys all for watching. Hope you all had a good holiday and a good new year, and I'll see you all in the next video.